So the No Damn's Given podcast, the next episode, is brought to us today by Farmhouse Berry Goza. So we actually have harvested the 2019 berries, and Farmhouse Berry is ready to go, and it's available at all your local package stores. And I hope you'll notice on the end of the Farmhouse Berry that's at the table here, we have our Pretoria Fields Forever. And if you notice the name for an old Beatles song, that's sort of how it's a strawberry Berliner Weiss. And we love the new bottles. We hope you will too. They're just, the white seems elegant, and the bottles themselves, and of course the liquid's delicious. So today I have Miss Sharon Subadan. And Miss Sharon, what do you do for a living?
I am
for everybody who doesn't know.
I am city manager here in Albany.
And so Sharon and I started working together almost immediately when she got into town. Is that right?
Yep, 4 years ago.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem like that long ago, but I guess we started thinking about the brewery about 5 years ago. And then we really started dealing with downtown development probably about a year after that. And almost in sync with that, Miss Sharon showed up. And she's taught me a lot about city government and understanding like how the different parts of it work. And we've talked about that some. Our relationship quickly moved forward because we moved the brewery project, from out at the farm to downtown. And now, one of the things that I learned, and that I don't think most people understand, is what your real role is as far as the city government goes. I think and at least there was confusion on my part about the whole idea of policy versus management, and where the city council that you actually call the board.
Correct.
And so can you explain that a little bit? Because I think that's super interesting for people to understand.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to be able to be with you, to dialogue, and to be able to talk about all things Albany, right? Yeah. So the City of Albany has a charter. Charter is our enabling legislation. And in that charter, we adopt what's called the council manager form of government. So in the council manager form of government, the council, or in our case, we call our council the commission, the Board of City Commissioners. They are responsible for setting policy, and they hire a manager. The manager is the city manager, which is my role, and what we do is carry out the day-to-day operations of the city. So to put it in a little bit more people speak, so in a publicly traded company, they have a board of directors, right? And they hire a CEO. And the board of directors makes policy. They decide on, to expand their shareholdings, or they make broad policy. But the CEO basically runs the day-to-day operations, calls the shots, if you will, on behalf of the board for the company. Well, the city charter and the council manager form of government is somewhat similar. So it is my role to oversee all of the operations of the city. In Albany, we also have a utility, so I have two hats. One of them is the day-to-day operations of the general government, and general government is kind of what people think of as general government. Right. Police, fire, parks, right-of-way management, the court system, the clerk's office, code enforcement, the things that people think of when they think of government. And my other role is the general manager of the utility. And we have a full-service utility. It used to be known as Water, Gas, and Light. Now it has a broader scope, and it's Albany Utilities. And Albany Utilities provides water, gas, light, sewer, stormwater, telecom, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
And so we have a broad customer base in Albany. We operate the utility very much like a business. A percentage of the business profits, if you will, supplement our general government by 25%. So 25% of the cost of general government comes from the utility. But for
25% of the cost or
general government.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Every year comes from the utility. So we have about almost.
Is that cost passed on? Meaning so if I was listening, I meant, well, I pay my utility bill. What are you talking about? Right. So how does that money flow?
Sure. So you pay $100 utility bill. Of that $100 utility bill, a percentage goes to pay every police officer on the street, every firefighter. So 25%, so 1/4 of general government is coming from the utility. And it always has supported. The water, gas, and light used to support the general government, always did. Now we formalized it, and now there's a percentage that comes every year at the end of the year from the utility, and that goes towards funding general government. So one of the things that we do is collect taxes, property taxes, sales tax, and unfortunately for us in Albany, our tax base is not growing.
Sure.
So for a while it was diminishing. Now it's sort of just leveling off. And property taxes are split between the city, the school board, and the county. The school board gets the largest piece of property taxes, followed by the county, and the city gets the smallest percentage of your property taxes. So imagine trying to run a business for, let's say, 7 years, and your income doesn't increase, but the cost of your employees continues to go up.
Yeah.
Because
we face that a lot, actually. Cost of living constantly goes up on everything, especially in medicine.
Sure.
Especially in my branch of medicine, government continues to shrink what our reimbursement is. So, so we face that.
Right.
We face that quite commonly. We have a very, I think you explained to me, we have a different or a advantageous situation as far as our how we get electricity here and how the water, gas, and light actually works. But I think it's just specifically the power. We're a part of a group. Is that right?
Right. We're part of a consortium, MEAG.
Yeah, right.
Municipal Electric Association of Georgia. There are almost 50 cities that are called electric cities throughout the state of Georgia that we jointly purchase power together. So way back in the turn of the century, small towns like Albany were given the authority to start their own utility. So water, gas, and light, in actuality, is almost 100 years old. Over time, these small electric utilities all over the state joined together back in the 70s and created MEAG, which is actually created by the state as an opportunity for us to jointly purchase power together. So obviously the buying power that we have as a consortium is a lot greater than we would have as an individual. So we buy into power generation. So Albany, for example, we own a percentage of certain power generating facilities around the state. And because we buy directly, and we also trade on the power market through MEAG, we are able to bring power to our communities at a pretty advantageous rate. And we try to keep those rates lower than Southern Company, for example.
Right.
And what that does is gives us some advantage on economic development, which is sort of why it was created. Because we're able to do that, we're able to draw industry to our community. And we've been very successful over the period of 50 years, bringing industry into our community, industry that uses power, industry that uses gas, industry that needs sewer. And those industries provide jobs, which in turn becomes an economic benefit to our community.
Right.
So it's all sort of intertwined.
So how does us, if I understand you right, so because we own it, then we can offer them lower rates and we can go out and negotiate and bring business there. And so, so the benefit of being involved in that is actually that we can bargain for and give these guys breaks where maybe if they weren't associated with that in another area, then they might not get.
That's correct.
Is that right?
That gives us a competitive advantage.
Yeah. And so that brings another thing that I wanted to discuss, which is like your views of bringing, encouraging business development, since that's how you and I got together.
Sure.
And what do you just mentioned it a little bit, but what are the other roles in government that encourage that? Because it's pretty obvious to me that we need to turn, as a taxpayer who pays a lot of property taxes, that trying to turn that millage rate around, and one way to do that is to get a bigger tax base so that all of that is distributed on more taxpayers.
So I don't believe government creates jobs, but I do think that we create an environment that allows business to be successful. I think by being business friendly,
sure,
creating public-private arrangements and agreements where the city brings our resources to the table and the private sector brings their resources to the table, you're able to get really great benefits. And part of what we're doing as a government is to see how we can make development easier for our businesses in Albany. We are partnering with CAA to contract all of our plan development and our
what
building.
Is CAA?
That's the acronym for the company that we contracted with. We outsourced plan development and building inspection about 2 years ago. We were having a very difficult time keeping up with the number of inspections. There was a lot of complaints from the business community. It took very long to get inspections done. It was slowing their process. Now we work collaboratively with a professional agency that brought the necessary resources for us to be able to do that at no additional cost to our customer. So what you'll see now is we do pre-development meetings. We'll do a pre-development meeting, for example, and we bring all the players to the table to help a new project walk through the entire process, which is a little different than 4 years ago when we were working.
Right.
And it was just a struggle.
It was.
So now it's a lot more efficient.
And I wanted to quit. But I'm glad I didn't.
I wanted to quit.
I know, but I'm glad I didn't. So, no, it's frustrating. And I'm in the medical industry. I'm a physician, so I dealt with the bureaucracy that's associated with medicine that is frustrating, and the bureaucracy that's associated with business is frustrating, or with government is frustrating. And so, and when you're an entrepreneur, all you see is end goals.
Right.
So it's constantly about trying to get over small hurdles to get to end goals, and dealing with those pathways. I totally agree with you about the idea that government doesn't create jobs. I think most entrepreneurs would agree that probably what government does for the most part is limit opportunity. But and some of that's good. I mean, we don't want everything everywhere, and that's part of what government is supposed to do, is limit those things. Like, we don't want I don't want to upset the package stores, but maybe you don't want certain stores in your neighborhood, and that's part of the beneficial part of that. But then we do want high commerce areas, just like downtown.
Right.
And so I think we've done a good job of that. We were commenting, it popped up on Facebook. And my kids were down here taking pictures. I had Mary Bryce graduated this year, my daughter, and then my son, who's going to be a senior, was taking some pictures down at the brewery. And last year there was no one down here when Mary Bryce was doing it, and this year everything's full.
Sure.
So it's amazing what a year can do. Yeah. Trying to just to find parking and put things together, and so things like that tend to build on each other.
Right. And when I came here, I established that downtown redevelopment was one of my platforms. It's a passion for me. I felt like there was so much opportunity here in Albany for downtown redevelopment, but like I said before, it takes public-private partnerships. It can't be that the government does everything. It can't be that the private sector does everything. We have to come together and help the private sector to invest. And the board has been really great about supporting downtown redevelopment and supporting my vision for growing downtown. And we have put some skin in the game. And the goal is to start the ball rolling, and then on that stack of dominoes, you hit the one stack, and your hope is that others will start to fall in place.
Sure.
So I feel very good about it. I think in a relatively short period of time, the Flats has been a huge success.
Mm-hmm.
Pace Burt came on board, answered the call, did that project. It was an old dilapidated building that the city owned. It was boarded up with nothing happening. As you well know, they have a waiting list now.
Sure.
It filled up right away. They got an award for historic preservation because they did such a nice job of preserving, the historic character of the building. We call Pretoria Fields our anchor tenant downtown.
And we appreciate that.
Every successful downtown redevelopment or any retailer, they have a anchor tenant. So you guys, took the risk first, and I'm so pleased at how the community has embraced Pretoria Fields and supported it. And the reputation is all across the state, really all across, getting to be all across the Southeast and ultimately the country. I go places and people, when I say I'm from Albany, they say, "Oh, that's Pretoria Fields." Like, yes, buy beer.
We like that. Yeah, buy two. No doubt. Well, good. So you thought, where do those, and here's something that I didn't understand until I got involved in the process. Where do the dollars come from? So you talked about dollars. Are those tax dollars? Are those grant dollars? Are those? And it's a softball question. So So where does that money that the city uses to help this redevelopment come from, and how do you decide on those projects?
So the city, as part of the MEAG group, we were fortunate enough to essentially, I'll simplify it, get a rebate of a certain amount of dollars over a 10-year period, 2008 to 2018. It was a sizable amount of money. A third of that money was put aside for economic development. So when I got here, the balance was growing nicely, and I asked the board to allow us to leverage those funds for downtown redevelopment specifically, and they were agreeable. So there are certain parameters around that funding. We don't fund everything. There are certain criteria. It's not free money. It's loaned money that we expect to be paid back over a period of time. And we're looking for certain types of projects, like the anchor tenant type projects,
Sure.
that will grow and will increase our tax base and will have the ability to repay the funding over a period of time. It's not an infinite amount of money. And, our goal is to put that seed funding in there. And then our hope is that it'll attract more private development. So it's almost like we're the catalyst with a piece of that funding. And that funding really is reserved for large-scale economic development projects, but the board allowed us to set aside a percentage of it for the purpose of downtown redevelopment.
Okay. So put on your thinking cap now, because let's talk about a hard question.
Sure.
And I'm gonna set it up a little bit, talking about some data that looks at crime ratios, or this is specific psych data, so it's in the medical literature. And so if you look at crime and you look basically look all over the world, there are areas in which there are rich people, or there are the wealthy, and they have fairly low crime rates. And then if you look at countries where there are basically abject poverty, meaning pretty much everybody's poor. So there's a leveling. So in the high, there's a leveling of what people have. And let's not say they're rich, but Switzerland would be one example of where most people are on the other end of the affluent scale. And then, sub-Saharan Africa is a example of where they're on the low end of economic scale, and there's really not a big separation between the haves and the have-nots. You don't see a ton of crime in those communities, and you don't see a ton of crime in the other. Where you see it, and this is talking about from a psych perspective or psychological perspective, is where you have people here who are the haves, and you have the people who are the have-nots. And it's where they see that there's a big discrepancy in the two things. And there's also something that looks at sort of the physical barriers that are associated with that. And so it's my perspective that one of our biggest goals as far as a community should be is to develop East Albany and get it back where it should be. So how do we do that?
So that's a big question.
That's a hard question.
So it's not inconsistent with what we talked about before.
Yep. How
do we encourage private development with public incentives, if you will, on both sides of the river? The challenge we have with retail is retail goes where the numbers say they're going to work. So I don't totally buy into the haves and have-nots, because Albany has a pretty decent middle-sized community. But what I know is true is there are neighborhoods in our town that have access to a lot of services and a lot of retail very easily. And then there are other areas of our town that's a food desert. The challenge we have is we can't make Publix open in East Albany.
Right.
The numbers have to drive it. And same thing with Panera Bread or Chipotle, or, name the things that,
Sure.
that are available on one side of town but are not on the other. Yeah. So one of the things that we're engaged in and we're very optimistic about is improved housing in East Albany. And we have two opportunities right now where we are able to help the private sector support their efforts to bring low and moderate housing to 2 big projects, possibly 3 big projects in East Albany. I think by giving people a better place to live, you improve their quality of life. When their quality of life is improved, their spending power is improved, and that will help to draw retail. Yeah. Opportunity to talk about perception versus reality. Mm-hmm. So in East Albany, we have Procter & Gamble. We have,
right, true.
We have Miller Coors. We have Webstaurant. We have I suppose you could say South and East Albany, you have the Marine Base. So we actually have really good industry and really good jobs in East Albany.
Good point.
A lot of and Phoebe has locations in East Albany, and they're one of our biggest employers. So, the notion, Coates and Clark has 2 locations
Coates and Clark, right.
in East Albany. One of them is rebuilt, and the new Pacific
is going over there.
Yeah. Why can't I think of the name? The new plant.
Pacific Southern or Pacific, the.
Thank you. It's early for me.
Good deal.
Thank you. All right, could you retake that part? That was embarrassing. So Georgia Pacific, East Albany. So we actually have a lot of industry in East Albany. And some of that industry is growing. P&G added quite a number of jobs last year. So, and in addition, we have Albany State that has a location in East Albany. Albany Tech has part of their plant in South Albany, or part of their. So, there's a lot going on in East Albany, but there isn't a lot of retail and there isn't a lot of housing. But I'll be honest with you, there isn't a lot of housing going on anywhere in Albany.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're exactly right. And probably we need to tear down a ton of housing
And
to make way.
rebuild.
Yeah, and either
Right.
put up parks or do something else with it. Just because our contracture of our population is to a certain extent, we just the people left, and hopefully they'll come back if we get some of
Right.
these things fixed.
Yep.
I guess the main thing I was talking about is just when you work the emergency room, which I'm not doing right now, but as I've done for the past 10 years, things that you get tend to be from that area.
Right.
So
And-
shootings, stabbings.
Sure.
It's not a place where you would where there are certain areas there where you wouldn't want to drive through. And so that's, and I guess, and maybe I didn't explain the psych part of it. I mean, it's not necessarily that like you could be middle class and you could be upset that this guy next to you has a nicer car, and that's the resentment that actually leads to the thought process that leads people to the crime from the psychological part. And so it's really just anything that we can do to decrease a divide, I guess is what is kind of what I'm saying. So whether it be a physical barrier like a river, how do we it's a great thing to put the bridge back up. Because it makes people feel like there's a connection between those two things. We want to feel as much as one people as you can.
Agreed.
I think if there's anything that we learned from last century, well, two things. Number one, we're all in this together.
Right.
And number two, it's individual responsibility that makes things better.
Right.
And so, and getting the individuals that are there, motivated to make their little part of whatever the world is better.
So I think you threw out a couple of things, and I'll challenge one of them.
Okay.
I wouldn't disagree that disparity has the opportunity to create divide. But one of the things we know from analyzing our crime statistics is a lot of our crime is not just connected to poverty, but it's connected to drugs. It's connected to those things that surround people that are living in abject poverty and cyclical poverty. One of the things that I think as a community that we need to deal with is how do you help people to break out of the cycle of poverty? There are jobs in Albany that go unfilled every year. And almost everybody you talk to is struggling to hire.
Yep.
But then we also know we have a large population of individuals who are unemployed.
Yep.
So how do we help to break that cycle of poverty? When an individual comes for a job interview and they can't pass a drug test, that is a problem for the employer.
Yep.
That's just a non-starter. But that happens to everybody. It happens to us in the city. We have, at any given time, we're interviewing for everything from police officers to, engineers. And we have a difficult time filling our positions. Meanwhile, and every employer in the city will tell you pretty much the same thing. Large business, small business, medium business, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we end up having to bring somebody from somewhere else because we've exhausted our efforts trying to fill positions here. So some of that, I think, is the social element of how do you help people to have the vision, have the dream, have the hope that they can break out of the cycle of what they saw their parents live through, their grandparents live through, their great-grandparents live through. How do you help them to see that there is a better way?
Yeah.
A lot of that is through education.
Right.
Getting our children educated, starting with pre-K all the way up. And I think our school system is doing a great job. They're also incorporating some social services that are support services to help our parents, that ultimately helps our children. Things like the 4C Academy that connects students to employment, allows them to graduate with an associate's degree or graduate with a skill, a marketable skill that they can take into the workforce, I think is helpful to us. But I think more has to be done on the social aspects. And we have a lot of nonprofits in Albany.
Yeah.
We need them to engage in how to bring people out of poverty.
Right. There's a Paul, I think it was Paul, maybe it was Luke, but to those who have much, much will be given, and to those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. And it's actually a sociologic principle that as you're being successful, things are more likely to become successful. So it's easier as you reach a successful point in your life and you've been competent at dealing with things, that doors open up. And it's not linear, it's non-linear.
Right. It's exponential.
And so if you reach here, it's easier to get here, and then it's easier to get here. So it's a x squared multiple.
Right.
The same thing happens down.
It does.
And then so it's super difficult to get those particular things, and I think that's the reason. Well, I know that's the reason that you've heard from businesses like, we would like to move down here, you have XYZ, but we don't, but then employment is going to be an issue. And so getting, doing those things, and you mentioned the one that I would have brought up was 4C Academy, because I think they're doing a great job, and putting more projects like that together. We've gotten and I'm not super familiar with it, but I know that some things have been done to improve the high school systems here. But then encouraging and training those kids to go to the next level, which may not necessarily be the state college, but maybe technical colleges.
Right.
And I think we're doing a good job with that. But it's that individual responsibility in trying to, and the church used to do a really good job of this, and I think part of, and I do blame churches, and there's actually that's a really long conversation, because there was a theological change over the last 30 years, where it was sort of you're good, I'm good, and we lost a lot of that lecturing responsibility. And so you're responsible for how, and you not only are you responsible, but you can change how your life course is.
Right.
And that was one of the things that gave us. So the response, so even going in, and even though things are bad, having the responsibility and the purpose to try to make those things just a little bit better. And if you make your local area just a little bit better, then things start to build up. And so stop philosophizing there. How'd you get to Albany? So is this the first job you've had?
No, this would be my 30th year in government.
All right.
So it's sort of a long story, but I'll kind of start at the end. I was an assistant county administrator in Hillsborough County, Florida, which is the Tampa Bay area. We served a population of 1.5 million. I had 2,500 people on my team.
You were near the beach.
You were near the beach. We had an international airport.
I know, that's right. You had baseball teams and football teams.
Yeah,
Tampa's nice.
Tampa is nice, and I love the water.
Yeah.
So, but I got to a point in my career where I never set out to be a city manager. I was working for the airlines. Some people are too young to remember Eastern Airlines, but Eastern actually used to fly into Albany back in the day. And there wasn't a recession in the 80s too. Yeah. And Eastern went under. I remember we bought our first house, interest rates were 13%. And when they went out of business, I was pregnant. With our first child, my husband and I were married for 5 years. And I was just suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was unemployed. And in the 80s, I was somewhat unemployable, which was a little scary. And my sister-in-law encouraged me to apply for a job with Miami-Dade County because we were living in Miami at the time. And I was like, I just don't want to do government. You know, I'm a private sector type of person. Yeah. You know, I really like the benefits I got with the airlines. You know, we flew all over the country for $6. Right. You know, it was awesome. $12 for first class.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Back in the day,
you know, space available. So, but you have not seen that in a long time. So, reluctantly, you know, I went downtown and I filled out a couple of applications. And my first job in government was sitting behind a green screen, entering police reports for 10 hours a day. And after about a week, I decided this is not what I want to do with my life. So I went back to school as a working adult with children. I got a first degree, I got a second degree. Ultimately, I got a master's degree, and started to get progressively, to your point, that individual responsibility. You know, progressively responsible positions, and I would take jobs that nobody else wanted. You know, I worked out of a bus garage. I worked in fleet management. I did jobs that were non-traditional but very operational. But my mom always says, you know, no experience is a wasted experience. So even those 10 hours that I worked behind a green screen in the police department, I learned about OCR. I learned all these things, UCR. I learned all these things about, you know, crime, which now is useful for me in understanding. You know, what is an aggravated assault versus an aggravated battery versus a burglary versus a robbery? You know, who knew those things would be relevant 30 years later? But so I was fortunate enough to have progressively responsible positions inside of Miami-Dade, and then I got a great opportunity to go to the DC metro area as a director and worked in Montgomery County for 7 years. They have a different form of government. Montgomery County, Maryland has the strong mayor form of government, which is different. And the mayor was no longer going to be running for office. And a number of department heads were either immediately let go or told, you know, the new administration was going to bring in a whole new set of department heads. I wasn't in that number, but I figured I was next. And so we made our way back to Florida, and I was in Tampa, in Hillsborough County for 8 years. I was a director for 3, and I was an assistant county administrator for 5. And that, when I became an assistant county administrator, that's when I decided that I think I really can sit in the seat, as we say in our, and I wanted to do that. But I didn't want to do it in a big place where I was going to spin the plates. I wanted to come somewhere where I could make a difference. I actually wanted to be in a community with a large African-American contingent. I didn't really think of Albany. I didn't know anything much about Albany. I did have connections from people who were either from here or came or went to Albany State. So I knew about Albany. But then the job advertised, and I started to investigate, and I interviewed, and I was hired. That's how I got here.
Awesome. Yeah. So,
long answer to
very
your
good
short
resume,
story.
though. Yeah.
Thanks.
Enjoyed it. So the last thing was the CSO, the combined sewer overflow. And so what's the update on that? Is there an update, or
there's an update? Okay. There's an update. So one of the things I discovered when I got here is SPLOST, which is Special Local Option Sales Tax, is a good thing. You know, it's that penny that you pay that pays for infrastructure. The challenge is we have infrastructure that we've built that we haven't maintained because our operating dollars are not sufficient to maintain them, and we haven't really had a plan. So as I started to evaluate kind of all that we had in terms of assets, it became clear to me that our assets under the ground were really our greatest vulnerability. And so there really isn't enough funding through our tax base, even with SPLOST, to effectively replace and manage that infrastructure. It's huge. Right. This isn't a unique problem for Albany. This is happening all over this country.
Sure.
For us, of course, everything is magnified because we are the news.
Right. Right.
So early in my tenure, we identified two major sewer lines that run on both sides of the river that if they rupture, we would put 50,000 gallons of raw sewage into the Flint per day. And so our plan was to completely renovate those two. That's the East and West Side Interceptor Project, which we were able to get GFA funds, which is federal funding that flows through a state agency to the tune of $15 million. It's a loan. It is not a grant or a gift. And we sought an opinion from the Attorney General, and we were able to use our SPLOST tax dollars to pay the debt service. So that makes it more affordable. So instead of having to take a chunk, $15 million out of our SPLOST, we're paying over 15
pay it through
years.
Property taxes or
try to raise sewer rates.
Try to raise sewer rates
right.
or try to do whatever, yeah.
SPLOST.
And I think that's what, I'm on the Flint River Keepers board, and that, trying to prevent what happened in Atlanta, where one
right.
day they were just had to deal with it.
Right.
And
right. They got
I think the mayor
decree.
took that as her torch marching forward, and she and they fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a continued ongoing problem, and it'll be much cheaper for us if we can deal with that. Don't have to do that, and can work with our partners like the Flint River Keepers to prevent them from forcing it. So
right.
I applaud you, because I think that's come a long way in the last 2 years as far as dealing with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still having, but it's such a complex problem. When they're talking about sewage spills, sometimes it's not sewage spills, sometimes it's just the CSO, stormwater runoff. Right. There's questions about whether which is more important, is the CSO or is it sewage, and so unless things get mixed up. So
I'll try to provide a little bit of clarity. So we have what I call the three-legged stool. We have localized flooding in our community. It's localized flooding that we've had forever that we just haven't dealt with. Right. We know there are areas that flood. What's frightening is more of our community is flooding when we have significant rain events. And we're having significant rain events more frequently. So issue one is, how do we deal with localized flooding? Because but for localized flooding, we wouldn't have CSO events. Right. The time you have a CSO event is when there's flooding, and then the stormwater gets into the sewer and it dumps out into the river. Right. The 7 CSO sites that we have that dump into the river are permitted by the state. They're allowed after a certain amount of rainfall, and the reason for it is so that we don't flood our entire city.
Right.
So we have to deal with...
That's the last permit granted for a city in the state of Georgia, right?
Actually, 4 cities still have CSO permits, but the requirements are a lot higher than they used to be, and a lot higher than what we have. And we're going through the process of being re-permitted, and we very much know that the standard is going to be raised. Right. So what we want to do is get ahead of that and formulate some solutions that we are able to present to the state that we think we can implement, and also that we think we can afford. So right now, as we speak, we've hired Constantine. They're a consultant firm out of Augusta. Mm-hmm. They're actively working at developing a plan. So the plan is going to say, if you take, we got to put the water somewhere, right. And nobody wants the water in their backyard. No. So we have to figure out, they will tell us, well, if you take this amount of water in this basin and redivert it, or build another pipeline, or connect to whatever it is they tell us, there'll be a cost associated with that, and it'll reduce our CSO by X%. So we've tasked them with, that's one area. So that just sort of handles water, stormwater, localized flooding, and CSO. And then there's the other side of it, which is our sewer infrastructure. Albany is very flat, and as a result of that, we have 108 lift stations, including the wastewater treatment plant. In Atlanta, they have the advantage of topography, And so gravity helps them. They don't have to pump their sewer in as many places as we have to. And 108 lift stations is a lot to manage. It's expensive to manage. And some of those are combined sewer and stormwater stations, and some of those are on the river. So the second leg of the stool, or the third leg of the stool, if you will, is a project that upgrades all of our river stations, sewer stations that are on the river that have the possibility of impacting the river if there's a spill. So we've upgraded our equipment. We've installed, or are in the process of installing, bypass pumping. So if something goes wrong, we're able to bypass it so it doesn't dump out into the river. And then we need to upgrade our wastewater treatment plant. You know, it's old. It hasn't been upgraded in a long time. And now there's newer technology as well. And newer technology that may be an initial upfront cost, but maybe less expensive to maintain over time. So part of my job, and in all fairness, staff has been making recommendations to the board for 15 years.
Right.
But nothing's ever been done. Part of what I do as a city manager, my strength is really not in the process of planning. I like plans, and I support planning, but my strength is in implementation. I'll take the plan that's been presented and prepared and carefully documented, but I turn the plan into action.
Sure.
So,
but give me a plan.
Right. Give me something to work with.
Give me a plan.
Give me a plan. So that's what Constantine is going to be doing for us.
And I can be critical. We hadn't had a good plan.
No.
I mean, we hadn't had a good plan. We've had lots of city managers. They've gone through quite a few that have sat in your seat, and things have not gotten better. In fact, they've gotten worse over the last 15 years. So it's that was the point, to take it all back, the policy versus management. Mm-hmm. So you're the manager, but we got to have somebody who's creating policy, and part of policy is planning, part of policy is having a vision of what we want our community to look like. Mm-hmm. So that's a out to the city councilman, I guess. So.
And it's a great segue, because the biggest policy decision that the commission makes every year is the budget. And we prepare it, we present it, and it is every penny that comes into the city through any mechanism, whether it's a grant, SPLOST, T-SPLOST, L-LOST, property taxes, a lot of acronyms. We as staff propose to them how those dollars should be spent. The policy decision that they make when they adopt the budget is, this is what we think, and this is how we think the funding should be spent. And respectfully, I think things have improved a lot in the last several years from where we were. You know, fiscally, we're in a pretty sound position as an organization, even though we've responded to 4 presidentially declared disasters. We've been able to get our community back on track. People come here from other places that have been devastated, and they're amazed at how much progress we've made. Right. Now, regretfully, we've become good at it.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, our tornadoes just got us ready to take care of a hurricane. I mean, it was
a major hurricane.
A major hurricane.
Yeah. And who knew?
Yeah. God gave us a little test, and then He sent us the real test.
Right. Right. So we're hoping for a storm-free. Next
had
couple
plenty
of years.
Tests.
Yeah, I think we passed. Now we want a break so we can focus on other things.
Well, is there anything you want to say in conclusion? I enjoyed having you. So
Thanks.
Say that. So.
Thanks. It was nice to be able to be here, and talk with more than a soundbite to share a little bit about what we are, who we are, and what I do. I think a couple of things. I think downtown redevelopment continues to be a passion for me. I continue to want to push the envelope with downtown redevelopment. I think a vibrant downtown creates a quality of life improvement that will continue to draw people to Albany. Right. I think that it's important for us to continue to work together. I think we've demonstrated that we have that capacity and capability. And I also think we need to recognize that we're a region. as a region, we need to work together because we have more strengths together than we do individually. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the community. The community has accepted me, accepted me and my family. And the board has supported the initiatives that I've put on the table. Some of them they've gotten a lot of criticism for. A lot of people said downtown will never work. We're just throwing good money after bad. People were, you were there.
Oh, yeah.
But they took the risk.
Can't read the paper. Read the paper. I was just kidding. But if you're involved in this, you got to have a thick skin.
You have to have a thick skin.
You have to have a thick skin.
And I also ask the community for grace. At some point we make mistakes. I have 1,100 people out there every day serving the community. 99% of them are 100% on board with moving Albany forward. But, every now and again we may blow it.
Right.
But that's not our standard is excellence. Stand with us to continue to move the community forward. We have great momentum. And I'm always amazed that when people from Atlanta and from all across the state see me and say, you guys are doing great things in Albany. And that really makes it all worth it.
Well, awesome. Well, continue to tell that story. I think we really enjoyed having you. If y'all liked what you saw, then please hit the like button because that helps us defeat the Google algorithm and gets more views. Also, subscribe if you like the podcast. Leave a comment and let us know who you would like to talk to or how we can make it better. Thank you very much, Ms. Sharon. Enjoyed having you.
Thanks for letting me be here. I appreciate it.